And then thirdly, our regular session held March 7th. If I could have a motion for approval of these minutes.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Okay, we have a motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The minutes have been approved. We now have communications, so I'll ask council members first. Do you have any communications tonight? Yes, Councilmember Swank.
And I'll defer to your response here. I do have a report from the APR Advisory Board. Would it be at this point in time or under other business that you would like that shared?
You could give the information now if you'd like.
Okay, all right, very good. The Athens Parks and Recreation Advisory Board met in their regular meeting last Thursday night in council chambers at 5:30. Many issues, but the big issue as it pertains to City Council revolves around an ordinance not before us tonight, one that has been tabled for further information, and that has to deal with the construction of pickleball and tennis courts. The discussion was a lengthy one. It started with questions in regards to how we got from the original plans, which were presented last May, of 3 tennis courts and 4 pickleball courts on the site of the current East State Street Ballpark, to 2 tennis courts and 4 pickleball courts. Following that, there was a discussion about the cost of that. It was about $130,000 to $135,000 more than the ordinance before us. The current ordinance is at $250,000. The estimated cost of putting these in is in the neighborhood of $380,000. That had to be weighed against departmental priorities and city priorities. They looked at 3 alternative locations, which would reduce the cost of this, taking advantage of the old OU runway, the old OU airport, which runs east and west behind the current recreation center. And because of that runway and the structure of that runway, we would not need to do as much excavation work, which would drive down the cost. The committee decided they needed more information. As of 5 o'clock today, they have not set a time for that next meeting, but they plan to hold that meeting before their next regularly scheduled meeting, which is the 3rd Thursday of the month of March. Because they are a public body, they will post that meeting. It's open to the public, and they will follow all rules and regulations relative to the Sunshine Law and the proper disposition of minutes and holding a meeting. So that's where we are at this point in time. Boil it all down. They want more discussion, and they are going to have another meeting prior to their next regularly scheduled meeting.
Thank you. Okay. And then when we get the updates, that can come back to the committee then, because it's been referred there. Any other communications from other council members? Yes, Councilmember McCary.
Thank you. This is from Jordan Pazel, who has communicated a concern about monitoring COVID variants BA2 specifically, and expressing a desire for council to not only look to the CDC's guidelines, but to communicate regularly with the public about our intentions to be potentially proactive in response to monitoring those kinds of health conditions.
Thank you. Other council members? If not, we'll turn to reports and communications from other elected officials. Law Director Elias. No. Auditor Hecht? No, any reports? Okay. Mayor Patterson?
No reports.
All right. We'll move on now to our ordinances for third reading. 2022 is an ordinance amending the 2022 appropriation ordinance 150-21 and authorizing the auditor to make interfund transfers. This is introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to approve 0-2022.
Second.
Thank you, Member Ziff. Number of items in this ordinance as discussed at committee and at first reading and mentioned at second reading. We are appropriating $65,000 to the general fund for payments to the Board of Elections and Health Department and county auditor fees. $45,000 to the general fund police for a server replacement. $403,000 to the general fund fire for our loan payment, which we hope to have paid off, I believe, in 2024. $7,450 is a grant we received from NOPEC that we are appropriating to replace less efficient light bulbs with more efficient LED bulbs. We have $50,300 to the street fund for a University Estates street project. $9,301 to the CDBG fund for transfer, and those transfers are outlined lower in the ordinance. $100,000 to the TIF fund, the tax incremental financing for the payment due to the Athens City School District, and $19,800 to the internal service IT fund that would cover the medical cost for an additional currently open IT position. And the transfers are from the CDBG fund to the appropriate funds within the city, the general fund, the street fund, the water, and the sewer fund. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and second for approval. Do we have any comments or questions from council members, from administration or other elected officials, or from our audience? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. We now have a series of ordinances for a second reading. I will read the title, pause briefly, see if there are any comments or questions. And if not, then it will just be the second reading of it, and that will be all that we will be doing tonight for most of them that I'm aware of. 3522 is an ordinance approving participation in the Region 10 governance structure under the One Ohio Memorandum of Understanding, and is introduced by all council members. If no comments or questions, we'll move on to 3622, which is an ordinance granting a special use permit to Leonard and Megan Meyer, owners, 89 South May Avenue, to allow an air conditioning coil, a sidewalk, and parking in the city's right-of-way in the unmaintained alley to Lincoln Avenue, introduced by Councilmember Grace. If no comments or questions, we'll move on to 3722. This is an ordinance granting special use permit to Montel LLC, the owner of 70 South Shannon Avenue, for use of the city's right-of-way to allow access via the unmaintained alley to Lincoln Avenue, introduced by Councilmember Grace. And if no questions or comments, we'll move on to 3822. An ordinance authorizing a contract with the Washington County Commissioners and declaring an emergency, introduced by Councilmember Carey. If no comments or questions, the next one is 3922. This is an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title III, Administrative Provisions, Chapter 3.07, Administrative Departments, Boards and Commissions, Sections 3.07.42A, Establishment of the Athens Recreation Advisory Board, introduced by Councilmember Swank. And if no questions or comments, we will move on to 4022, an ordinance amending the 2021 appropriation ordinance. This is introduced by Councilmember Crowell. If no comments or questions, the next one is 4122, an ordinance amending ordinance 422, the 2022 appropriation ordinance 15021, and authorizing the auditor to make interfund transfers, introduced by Councilmember Crowell. If no questions, we'll come to our last one for second reading. 4222, this is an ordinance providing for the issuance of $140,000 of notes by the City of Athens, Ohio, in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of renewing notes previously issued to pay part of the costs of acquiring new parking meters and declaring an emergency. This is introduced by Councilmember Crowell. And if no questions or comments, we will now move on to our ordinances for first reading. 4322 is an ordinance authorizing disposal of certain vehicles no longer needed for a municipal purpose. And this would be introduced by Councilmember Reisner. He is not here. Councilmember Crowell, do you happen to have that information up so that you could speak to
4322?
Yes, correct.
Yes. Thank you, President Isley. There are two vehicles listed in this ordinance that are no longer needed for a municipal purpose, a 1999 Ford Taurus and a 2007 Ford Expedition. And this ordinance would allow the Athens County Municipal Court to authorize the court to dispose of these vehicles by donation to other governmental agencies, by auction or sealed bids or trade-in, or to sell for scrap. Thank you, President Isley.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from council members, administration, elected officials, or the audience? If not, we'll move on to 4422.
I'm sorry, point of order.
Oh, yes.
I'm happy to do that. I am not a member of the Transportation Committee. Does that matter?
Oh, that does not matter. No,
Okay,
you're okay.
fine.
I
Thank
just
you. Just want to make sure.
made you
we're
one
moving forward.
tonight by
No problem.
Welcome to the committee.
association.
It's the one committee I'm not a member of, so, I'm happy to join.
I'm sorry, and I hope council members Grace, Ziff, and Swank are not offended.
I'm highly
I'll
offended.
make sure and do that next time correctly. Thank you. 4422 is an ordinance amending Ordinance 10221, Athens City Code Title I, General Provisions, Chapter 1.03, Code Fees Established, Solid Waste, Recycling, and Optional Composting Rates, introduced by Councilmember Swank.
Want to take this one? You are on this committee.
No, thanks.
You are on this committee. This was first introduced back in January of this year, and essentially what it does is three things. Number one, it makes equal, addresses the issue of equity when it comes to the amount of trash you put out, regardless of one's residence. Whether you're a homeowner or a renter, you put out one can of trash, you will now pay the same rate. The second thing it does, it incentivizes, theoretically, people to put out less trash. We have a tiered system where if you put out one can, you pay X. You put out two cans, you pay out Y. It's a considerable difference, almost 50% difference. So it addresses that too. And finally, it addresses the issue of revenue, and we've run the numbers, and this will allow us to remain revenue neutral so that we don't have to pull any additional funds out of the general fund to pay for our trash and garbage. Again, this was first introduced in January, went back to committee of the whole, was vetted with the administration, Mr. Stone and his staff, and we bring it back tonight for first reading.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions? Yes, Councilmember McCary.
Thank you. I'll direct this to Councilmember Swank and just ask for any comments you might have on potential limitations or criticisms of or just weaknesses of the proposal as is, in particular with any kind of variables that we can't control for.
The only thing I can anticipate not being able to control for is if suddenly the seas parted and everybody switched from the 2-can rate to the 1-can rate. And we discussed that, Mr. Stone, myself, Mr. Chicky, and Mr. Riggs. We really don't think that's going to happen. However, should it happen, we have built in a slight escalator clause with each additional 100 people, the trash rates will go up 20 cents, not $20, but 20 cents per month. And if that were to happen, and with that 20-cent per month increase, it will allow us to remain revenue neutral. And that is a big consideration. Last week, Auditor Heck asked us to allocate another $100,000. You know, we just gave up we just refunded $95,000 in income tax requests. We can't dip into the general fund to pay for more garbage, so that was built in, and I'm fully, what's the word I want to look for? I'm fully confident that the numbers that Mr. Stone and his staff ran are good numbers. I don't think they would set up a situation to put us into a deficit situation.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, from council members, other elected officials.
I have one comment.
Yes, and the public, yes, so.
My name's still here from last time. I'm Robert Delac, live on Morris Avenue here in the city of Athens. I'm just representing myself. So, late last year, City Council passed a rate increase for trash and recycling that was needed to balance the budget for the solid waste account. You were talking about that. Sorry I walked in a little late. Didn't realize we'd get this far on the agenda this quick. Those rates went into effect in January. For my calculations, it was like 12 to 15% cost increase for most people, with 1 or 2 containers. So a pretty good pay increase, but it was rate increase, but it was, I think, needed to balance the budget, right? And so it was necessary, but a substantial increase nonetheless. So then there's this proposal from Member Swank, which he attempts to remedy an injustice to the city's rental population, which honestly is a laudable cause, and I agree that we need to deal with this issue. But what this proposal amounts to is a risky rate reduction for renters that will likely have significant impact on our current trash rates for all customers, owner-occupied and rental properties alike. The upfront cost in the proposed ordinance is a mere 20 cents, as was just stated, per account, which seems a pretty small pill to swallow. However, and I think most of you know me, I'm not Chicken Little. I don't run around saying the sky is falling, but I think this is an issue that needs to be addressed here. Is under this ordinance, landlords could opt all their eligible properties down to the 1 container rate, which would save about $7 per unit per month, which is across the board for them could be a substantial amount of money. The cost to all accounts will go up by another 20 cents for every 100 units opted down. So how many landlord accounts are out there that would qualify for this? 2,259. Landlords could just say, yep, I want all my accounts, and we could have a situation where 40% of the accounts out of 5,400 accounts would be eligible for the reduced rate. And if there's a precedent for what would happen in the situation, when the landlords can opt to reduce their utility bills to the city, sure, the compost program. It was implemented with an opt-out option. Virtually all the landlords, maybe all, opted their properties out of the program. Across the city, 80% of accounts opted out of composting, which increased the cost of those remaining by over almost $3 a month of what it would have cost as estimated if it was across the board system that didn't have opt-outs. So if the landlord's reaction to the opt-out for the compost program is any indication, most, if not all, eligible accounts would likely be opted to the reduced rate. So worst case scenario is everyone's trash fee would go up by about $4.50 per month over the current rates, not 20 cents. You have to do an even 20 on that, but that's the number. If all the accounts were to opt out, it's $4.52, I think. Even if half of that happens, the new rates would almost double the rate that we already took this year as a as a rate hike for trash and recycling. So it would be another significant increase on top of what we've already taken this year. So how can you fix this ordinance so it would help Athens reduce the inequitable rates, but not risk a huge rate increase across the board right now when we just had a large rate increase? I thought it might be possible to allow tenants to maybe make a request to have the bill reduced if they're paying the bill directly themselves. There are hundreds, maybe 1,000 child accounts that were created for that purpose, so there's a fair number of renters who are paying directly to the city for their utility bills. But the logistics of dealing with cross-referencing, checking with the landlord to make sure this tenant is a valid tenant in the property at this address. The renters' names are nowhere to be found in the database. It's just the landlord's names. So a lot of work would have to be done by the billing staff to be able to validate every request that came in, which probably makes this a huge hurdle that's likely unfeasible. So even though I'd like to say we could add 2 words to this ordinance and put in put in occupants, that occupants could opt in instead of landlords doing it, but that seems to be untenable as well. Maybe somebody could tell me otherwise on that, but that seems to be the case. So I don't know if there is a way to fix this ordinance. What I think needs to be done is to table this bill, and as suggested by many when this topic first came up in committee, to take a strategic approach at revamping rates in a way that both promotes equity and incentivizes people to reduce their waste when the contract is relet next year. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the comments. Any additional comments or questions? Yes, Councilmember Spielness.
Yeah, I kind of had thought that too. Thank you, President Nisley. I kind of thought that might be an issue too, except if they go down to the 1 can rate, people are going to put their trash out in bags, and that costs $5.25 each. I don't think they're going to want to do that. It's a mess, and it would end up costing quite a bit of money. So I think that was taken into consideration, unless I understand differently than is the case. So I hear where you're coming from, but I don't think that's going to happen. Thank you.
Councilmember McCarran.
Thank you.
To do that, you'll need to turn off airplane mode.
Thank you. I was just hoping for some perspective, I think maybe our City Safety Services Director might be able to give on how frequently we are charging folks for just putting their bags of trash that they don't have a can for out. Is that even just loosely a reasonable sum of money that we can count on when it's not pandemic times?
I don't have that information right now. I will get that information and share it with you. It would be similar to special hauls, which is a situation where anything outside of a can is computed against that special haul fee. Bags are carved out. If you look inside the ordinance, it talks about special hauls and that cubic yardage, and mainly that's applied to like beds and bicycles and various other things that are outside of the can. I can get back and let you know how frequently that occurs.
Thanks.
We can get an idea from HRC, and it'll be an estimate. It used to be easy to track when people could purchase the stickers that you put on your extra bag of trash. Easier, it's not 100%, but we can get you some numbers.
Thanks.
And the other item that we haven't moved towards, that I understand we will be moving towards when we maybe as we renew the contract and look at trash again, is that we are talking about a 32-gallon can, and there is by no means compliance. I don't know anybody, in fact, who has a 32-gallon. Oh, there, two. Okay. And Mr. Dulac. Okay, so that's great. But not many people do in the city. So that's another inequitable situation we need to work with. Okay, thanks for all the comments. This has been read for the first time, and we'll wait for, we hear your recommendation, Mr. Dulac, or the suggestion to consider tabling, but we will wait to hear what the administration has on this additional information by the time of the second reading. So thank you. Ordinance 4522 is an ordinance amending the 2022 staffing levels and pay grades authorized by Ordinance 14121. That's introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Nisley. This ordinance, as mentioned, deals with changing our staffing ordinance 14121 to add a new position to the law director's office, and that is the position of assistant law director / part-time prosecutor. This would reduce the number of prosecutors in her office by one, but would create this new position, which is needed within the law director's office, and law director has made a very good argument for the necessity of this position. Council members will have on their drive a copy of the changes to the staffing spreadsheet. This ordinance also removes a cemetery maintenance position under lands and buildings. The other part of this ordinance is the necessary edits to the City of Athens pay grades by simply adding the title of this new position. The prosecutor position is in pay grade 9. This new assistant law director part-time prosecutor position does not move out of that pay band. It is still in pay band 9, but the edit would be to add that actual position title to the pay grades spreadsheet. Thank you, President Nisley.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from council members? Other elected officials? Mayor Patterson?
Just to say that I think this is an important change to the staffing ordinance. I fully recognize there seems to be forever increasing workload that the law director's office has, and I think that this will absolutely help to a degree. Not a whole great deal, but certainly help.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any other comments or questions from our audience members? If not, we'll move on to Ordinance 4622. This is an ordinance authorizing compensation of greater than 25% through the assigned pay grade for a new hire into the position of Assistant Law Director, Part-Time Prosecutor. Introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. Obviously connected to the previous ordinance and those edits to our pay bands and staffing spreadsheet. City Council must approve any rate that is more than 25% through the assigned pay grade, as mentioned, pay band or pay grade 9. So Section 1 of this ordinance reads, in accordance with the non-union personnel fringe benefits package, Ordinance 142-21, Section 23B compensation, Athens City Council does hereby authorize the law director to hire into the position of Assistant Law Director, Part-Time Prosecutor at the hourly rate of $36.06, a rate that is $2.35 greater than 25% through the assigned pay grade. Thank you, President Isley.
Thank you. Comments or questions from council members, administration, other elected officials, or the audience? Seeing none, we'll move on to Ordinance 4722. This is an ordinance accepting a grant from the Klein Penny Educational Fund to Arts West, introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. We discussed this at committee, and I'll just go ahead and read Sections 1 and 2 of this ordinance. Section 1, the City of Athens hereby accepts a grant from the Klein Penny Educational Fund in the amount of $4,000 to be used to purchase supplies for the after-school arts program and the musical lending library at Arts West. Section 2, the City of Athens expresses its appreciation to the Klein Penny Educational Fund for this grant. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions? Council members, administration, other elected officials, or our audience members? If not, we'll move on to Ordinance 4822. This is an ordinance amending the 2022 appropriation ordinance and is introduced by Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I would like to make a motion to suspend the rules for 04822, appropriation ordinance, for a number of reasons. One is that the auditor's office is having to pay more and more income tax refunds, and they need this appropriation in the general fund auditor, as well as we have another ordinance tonight, the next ordinance, which deals with a prior year bill. And for those in attendance that don't know how the city deals with bills from the prior year, it does need city council authorization. This is a bill that was through a number of different sort of confusing circumstances with the company changing hands. A bill was not paid from, not from 2021, but from previous to 2021. This is a bill that we owe, and it was a bill that was not paid due to City of Athens confusion or a mistake. So this is not a bill that came late to the city, that was on the fault of the medical insurance provider, but it is due to the city. So I do feel it's very important that we stay current on our bills. There is a concern that we could be dropped from this third-party administrator if our payments are not current, and I highly advise us suspending the rules tonight to approve this payment so that we can pay the bills that we owe as a city. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion.
Second.
We have a second for suspending the rules. And just so council members are aware, suspension requires 6 votes. Tonight, we only have 6 council members, so it does require a unanimous vote if you're wanting, if this is to be suspended as requested, as recommended. So all those in favor, and, okay, yes, and a discussion, yes.
Several questions here. Number
Yes.
one, it sounds like we're talking about two ordinances at the same time?
We are only to the extent that Section 1 of Ordinance 4822 refers to the $5,777 that is then incorporated in the second ordinance, 4922.
So we're voting to suspend the rules on 4822,
Correct?
but not 4922. That'll be a separate one.
That will be a separate one to authorize the payment of a prior year
But that'll be a
expense.
separate request to suspend the rules.
Yes, it will.
Okay. All right, so back to 4822. Last week, or was it the week before, we authorized, or we, in committee, it was last week, talked about putting an additional $200,000 from the general fund to pay what we anticipate to be additional income tax liability. Is that correct? I guess I'm asking the auditor because this would be her department. Are we about out of money to pay income tax refunds?
Yes. I believe I sent an update after that meeting stating that we had processed another, I don't know, $26,000 in refunds, and that we were down to about $71,000 in our refund account line, and that we had $80,000. Of course, I asked the tax administrator to add that up, that we had $80,000 in refund requests sitting on her desk when we did that. So yes, we need to get the money in that account so we can continue to process these, because they continue to come in daily at this point in the year.
Thanks.
Other questions? Comments, discussion? Mayor Patterson?
Just to be clear, I mean, to echo what the auditor was just saying, we're talking about out of TC 600, which is the refund category within the budget. So that's where the money is running low. It's not the city's coffers are running low.
Right.
Just to be clear with everybody.
$71,000.
Okay. Any other, thank you for the clarification. Any other questions? All right, so the motion now is to suspend, we have the motion and second for suspending the rules on 4822. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the rules have been suspended. Councilmember Crowe.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to approve 04822.
Second.
Thank you, Member Ziff. There are a number of items, as mentioned, the $200,000 to the general fund auditor for income tax refunds, the $4,000 to appropriate to the recreation fund from the grant that was mentioned in an earlier ordinance for those supplies for Arts West. And we also are doing work on our Oakmont lift station, and this ordinance appropriates $35,000 to the sewer fund in order to make those repairs. And then the aforementioned $5,777 for the prior year bill. Thank you, President Isley.
Okay, so we have a motion and second for approving this ordinance. Any questions or comments from council members, administration, other elected officials, or our audience members? If none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries, and the ordinance has been approved. 4922 is an ordinance authorizing the payment of a prior year expense and declaring an emergency, and is introduced by Councilmember Crowe.
Thank you, President Isley. We have discussed this at committee and just discussed it in the previous ordinance. This one deals specifically, as I mentioned, with the authorization to pay this prior year expense. I'll go ahead and read section 1. The auditor is hereby authorized to expend up to $5,777,000 from the general fund, other administrative, to pay a prior year expense to Sedgwick Care Works Comp. Thank you, President Isley. And I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules for 04922 for the reason stated previously, is that we need to pay our bills. Thank you.
And do we have a second?
Second, but also there's a typographical error that we have 5,777,000, and it's actually just $5,777.
Thank you, Member Grace. When I said it, it sounded odd to me.
That number got a lot bigger.
At which point you might not want to
Strike
suspend.
the second thousand.
Move the decimal point.
Okay, I assume that it's just a clerical.
So we have a motion and second for suspending the rules. Are there any questions or comments?
We talked about, excuse me,
Yes, Councilmember Swain.
we talked about this at the committee meeting, and I walked away at that meeting not real clear of how we got to where we are today. So this bill was for services rendered in 2019, correct? Okay.
Yes, and that's and I will clarify too. I mean, I know you're looking at the auditor, and she records some of this, but some of this has come through the HR department in the city, so that some of the questions she may not have all the information on.
Okay.
So just so you're aware of it. And to my knowledge, yes, there was a 2019 bill, but subsequently 2020 and 21 were paid. Change of staff here at the city level in the HR department, and so there were some gaps there. And then also, I believe there's also a change in the company, and so the mistake is on our end. And as I understand, if we're not current, we could be removed. They're not threatening it today, but there could be. They could remove if we're not current on this, and it's a 3-year-old bill.
This change in our third-party administrator just happened last year. I suspect that's why it's coming up now. And it's probably just like almost any bill. If you miss a bill and you pay the next one, they apply it to the oldest bill, and you continue paying, but you're still behind. They don't skip that one and apply it to newer bills. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I imagine that's what happened, and with the changeover in the company, it was discovered. And as we said, it was a difficult time in the HR department and got missed, and we thought we were paying our bills, but actually we had missed one. And I mean, we did go in and see where a requisition had been put in for it, and then it had been taken out before it got processed. So it's just one of those things. People make mistakes, but now it's been over 2 years. The new owners of the company want us to catch up, because they are continuing the service that we have, and it's a very important service that we really, we can't handle what they do for us.
Right.
As far as I believe I said in email, is monitoring, time frames, doctor's appointments, and all the paperwork that's involved when somebody files for injury leave. And I think that something else that people don't realize is how many times that happens in the city. It's not, it's not uncommon. Some injuries, of course, are more than others, but there are time frames that we have to pay them, time frames that they can be out on injury leave before the city is able to cut them off. I don't mean to say it like that, but there's just a lot involved in managing injury leave and workers' comp payments, and so they know what they're paying. And as I said, we pay this company about this amount every year, but we pay the workers' comp fund hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to pay for all of these things. So I don't know, did everybody get that email and pretty much understand how it works and why it's important that we have them managing our program? And it's just not really fair to them to make them wait for their money, in my mind. It wasn't their fault at all. And they let us keep going, and finally it's time to get caught up.
Did we recently receive this bill?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Notice. So we received the bill in 2019.
Okay.
But we recently got notice that, hey, you guys aren't paid up, and we need this money, kind of thing. It wasn't like that, but yeah.
And
Like I said, this company just took over last year.
Right. Did the bill say pay within X number of days?
I haven't seen the bill yet,
Remit immediately? Okay.
which it would be. It's 2 years old.
Yeah. No, understood. And nobody's placing blame on anybody. It's just, I think to say that they're going to drop us is probably not going to happen. Because there are other vendors out there. And yes, we owe this money. There's no if, ands, or buts about it. But to say that they're gonna drop us, nobody's gonna drop us.
Well, we don't know that.
Because
Number
we
one.
either pay the vote and pay the bill today, or we vote and pay it in, what, 2 more readings?
Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. I simply don't see the purpose in waiting to pay this bill. It doesn't make any sense to me at all what the purpose is of waiting another 3 or 4 weeks to pay a bill that we owe. Thank you.
Councilmember Grace.
I concur with Member Crowell. I think that the company has operated with us in good faith, and we are aware of an error that happened on our part, and the best answer is to remedy our error as quickly as we can. And I don't see that any member of council is going to vote to not pay this bill because we believe that we owe this bill. And so I think that paying it as quickly as we have discovered the error is the right thing to do.
Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Swank.
It's not a matter of paying the bill or not paying the bill. One of the greatest criticisms during the last election of city council was council's propensity to suspend the rules. That's what I'm debating tonight, the suspension of the rules. I fully intend to vote to pay this bill at the first possible opportunity. What I have a problem with is suspending the rules for something that I don't necessarily consider an emergency. Putting this money in the fund to pay income tax refunds, that's an emergency. We don't have the money. We don't have the money, and we have an obligation to refund those things. Yes, we have an obligation to pay this bill, but I don't think 3 or 4 weeks make that big a difference. It's the suspension of the rules. And I don't want to start down that path of being a council that's constantly suspending the rules. Over 25 times last year. There weren't that many emergencies. That's what I'm debating. I agree with you, Member Crowell. I agree with you, Member Grace. We owe the money and we need to pay it. I just have a problem with suspending the rules.
Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. Thank you, Member Swank. I understand your concern with suspension of the rules. I do. This is a classic example of when suspending the rules is a good idea and is necessary. This is not the case, in my mind, to make an example of this situation for the suspension of the rules issue. I agree that council should be very careful about suspension of the rules, especially when the public needs a chance to come forward over a period of 3 readings to talk about an issue that's very important to the city of Athens. The important thing with this is to pay the bills that we owe. So this is, in my mind, the wrong example to use to say that we should not suspend the rules for this. Thank you.
Mayor Patterson, then we'll come back to Councilmember Grace.
I'm a little taken aback by this whole conversation, given that you just got done suspending the rules to pass the previous ordinance. So why would you suspend that rule and not suspend this when this is the past due bill that needs to be paid? The other items that were in the previous ordinance, other than the $5,777, had really no reason to be suspended under that logic. And so I don't understand. I find it almost hypocritical to sit there and speak to not suspending this one when this is the most important one to go ahead and suspend, where you didn't, this conversation didn't even take place with the previous ordinance.
Councilmember Grace.
I just wanted to remind members of the public and fellow members of council that we have been aware of this bill for some time now, because there was a lengthy discussion at committee, and in order for there to be a lengthy discussion of committee with all the background information provided to us, the city had received notification and had done some research and discussed that with us prior to a meeting a week ago. So this isn't just something that I think in terms of if I missed a bill, a personal bill, and then waited like a total of 6 weeks to pay a bill that was already significantly past due, I think that would be very irresponsible. And we know that this bill is already significantly past due, and we have known that a while in order to enable us to have the amount of discussion we've already had. So I am in agreement with Member Crowell that this is an appropriate time to suspend the rules to maintain the city's relationship and integrity with a company that we need to have a relationship with.
Okay, thanks for all the comments.
I have
the
one more comment,
questions.
please,
And then we'll close and vote.
because it was directed at me, and it was not hypocritical. By voting to suspend the rules on the previous ordinance, it allowed the auditor and her staff to do her job, an obligation that this city has to the citizens of Athens. To me, that was an emergency. I listened very carefully to what Mr. Crowell said a moment ago, and he's absolutely right, and he changed my mind. What we're voting on now is a perfect example of when suspension of the rules are in order. And I plan to vote to suspend the rules today. But we had to let her do her job. And with a clear conscience, that's why I voted to suspend the rules.
Okay. We've had the discussion. All those that we have a motion to suspend. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the rules have been suspended.
Thank you, President Isley. I'd like to make a motion to approve 04922.
Second.
Okay. And any further discussion? Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries and the ordinance is approved. We now have announcements and other businesses. We will be having a committee meeting session next week, so those of you who need to have committees, you will be gone.
And let
And
Scott
so
know.
They'll let Scott know, our government director, government channel director, if you could let him know. He needs to know by Wednesday, so we can have that finalized by Thursday and publishing by Friday to the public, the agenda. Any other announcements? All right, we have several motions to move through, approval of financial reports and credit cards. The first one is the financial reports for February 2022. Could I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries, and those have been accepted, those financial reports. The next one are the credit card transactions. If I could have a motion for accepting these.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries, and the credit card transactions have been accepted. I believe Councilmember Spielness has an appointment, a motion to appoint to the Housing Appeals Board.
Yes, I'd like to appoint T. Ford Ahmed, who is the Professor Emeritus of Public Relations and Media Studies at West Virginia University. She's been the Media Relations Director at Mount Sinai Preservation Society, and this appointment would last to December 2024.
Okay, we have a motion to recommend the appointment of T. Ahmed Ford to the Housing Appeals Board. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Second, okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you, and we'll thank Dr. Ford for her volunteering on the Housing Appeals Board. The next one is a reappointment to the Affordable Housing Commission. Councilmember Grace?
Yes, I would like to recommend that we reappoint Molly Fitzgerald to the Affordable Housing Commission. Molly is the Executive Director of the Athens County Economic Development Council and is a very valuable member of the Affordable Housing Commission. I'd like to make a motion that we approve
Seconded.
that.
And
Thank
a
you.
second to it from Councilmember McCary. Okay, all in favor of the appointment of Molly Fitzgerald to the Affordable Housing Commission, in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And we thank Molly for her continued service on that commission. We have an opportunity for citizens to speak on legislative items and city services that were not covered on the agenda. Is there anybody in the audience that is wishing to speak on a particular topic not on our agenda tonight? If so, they would have up to 3 minutes. Okay. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? Second, okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you so much. We are adjourned at 7:51 PM, and we'll see you all next week.
Dang.